We'll finish up handout 1.03 by talking about binary form and ternary form. I don't think there's too much to say about them, but it's important that we go over them, I think, just as a review, if anything, if for nothing else. As for binary forms, all binary forms are fundamentally, I'd like you to think of them as two-part forms. Either or both reprise may be a period, perhaps less often a sentence. Each part, typically repeated, is, as I mentioned, called a reprise. Accordingly, binary form is sometimes called a two-reprise form. We can make a distinction between sectional and continuous binary form. In a sectional binary form, the first reprise ends with a perfect authentic cadence in the home key. In a continuous binary form, the first reprise ends with a half cadence in the home key, or with a half cadence or perfect authentic cadence in another closely related key. Remember, closely related keys are keys whose signatures differ by no more than one sharp or one flat. Keys whose signatures lie right next to each other, one click to the left or to the right in the circle of fifths. More important, though, than sectional or continuous is the distinction we can make between rounded and simple binary form. I used to introduce this the other way around, first by talking about simple and then talking about rounded. I think you'll see why I've since changed and talk about rounded first instead of simple. Anyway, rounded binary form. In rounded binary form, within the second reprise, pardon me, there is a return, often abbreviated, of the opening material. So that second part, that second reprise, within that second reprise, there will be a return, often abbreviated, of the opening material. Because of this, we can symbolize rounded binary form as ABA, or if you want to use the repeat signs, as I've indicated here in the handout, A, show repeat signs around them, and then BA, again with repeat signs around the B and the A. I think this illustration with the repeated signs gives you maybe a better sense of rounded binary forms two-partedness. It's a made-up word, but it's useful all the same. Within a rounded binary form, the end of B, this contrasting material, is often marked by a half cadence. Within a simple binary form, there is no return within the second reprise of the opening material. Therefore, you can symbolize rounded binary as simply A, B, or again, if you want to use the repeat signs, A enclosed within repeats, B enclosed within repeats. I think I neglected to mention that when we speak about B, we're speaking about some kind of contrasting material. As for ternary forms, I'd like you to consider this. All ternary forms are fundamentally three-part forms. They can be symbolized ABA. Oh, and I know what you're thinking. Wait a minute, isn't this virtually the same as rounded binary? Well, in some sense, yes. Ternary forms, however, tend not to have repeats within the music, so don't look for repeat signs in ternary. I think more important, though, the B part of a ternary form tends to stand in greater contrast to its surrounding A parts. As I tell my undergraduates, think contrast, think ternary. The B part in ternary will sometimes also end with a perfect authentic cadence in a usually closely related key. And often the return of A in a genuine ternary form is a full-blown return, not a partial one. Here then are some differences between the two, but let me assure you, I'm not going to sweat them with you. In fact, the theorist of form, who has most influenced me, William Kaplan, doesn't even really much mention rounded binary forms. He regards rounded binary forms as essentially small ternary forms. And while I understand what he's saying, I haven't yet been able to bring myself to go along completely with him on that. Anyway, then there's the matter of compound ternary. I'll just simply mention this by way of introduction. We won't give you an example of this in any assignment or on a test. But anyway, compound ternary form is sometimes found in middle movements of Baroque suites or sometimes classical sonatas. We might have a minuet followed by a trio, following which are the instructions da capo minuet. This means to go back and play the minuet again. Note that the minuet and trio might themselves be a binary form or a rounded binary form. You can have forms within forms. So the entire movement as performed with minuet, trio, and then da capo minuet would be an example of a compound ternary form. And on the annotated versions, or version rather, of handout 1.03, I've given you an example in the Burckhardt Anthology. I've not given you, I have directed you to an example in the Burckhardt Anthology of a compound ternary form. So be sure to do the assignments on sentence or period, and then also binary form or ternary form. I'm just asking you for some basic information on these, which should be pretty clear on the assignments themselves. Well, that about does it for handout 1.03. I'm sorry that the first movie went a little long, but since I have a few seconds at the end of this installment, at the end of this movie, let me mention that today's lecture has been brought to you in part by the United Makers of Colorful Skinny Ties.